I'm from the Kw'Alaams tribe, where I come from, and Gilhax is my Indian name, James Bryant, and I've lived here right from the beginning when I was born in 1933. I've been here since, although I moved a bit, maybe a couple of years when I worked in Rupert, but I've lived like I worked in logging camps and all that, but I've always lived in Simpson in the winter months. Our ancestors were the 9 tribes that pertain here, where they really originated from. The place we call Kw'Alaams, up in the Skinner, just below Hazelden a ways. And the word Tsimshian, as they migrated down the river to the different areas of the 9 tribes inside of the Skinner River. Tsimshian. Xian is the river where our people first lived before Rupert. Rupert Harbor was the, and Metlakatla Pass was the winter village of these 9 tribes. There were 10 tribes, but one of the tribes called Kw'Alaams extinct, and before they were really extinct, and they amalgamated with the Kw'Alaams and the Gidendal tribes, which were the Eagles, who they were and who they amalgamated with, and brought the tribes down to 9, which it still exists today as the 9 tribes. And Kw'Alaams is the name of this place here. And again, that came from the abundance of wild roses in the area when they first lived here, and called the place it's a place of wild roses, is what Kw'Alaams really means. Such as the place, such as Metlakatla is where the word Metlakatla comes from, as the white man says Metlakatla. But the real issue is Metlakatla. When the meaning of that is the movement of the tides through the narrow pass of Ben Pass, there where our people lived. You can hear the tide coming in. When the tide goes out, it's the same thing. Such is the word Metlakatla. And when Duncan came, I guess he's the one that said Metlakatla, which is a little different, but the real pronunciation is Metlakatla, the saltwater movement of the tides in that area. The Rupert Harbor was a winter village, not because it was a calm area in the winter months and sheltered, but because of the resources that our people survived on in the winter months. You go into the forest and you do your hunting to whatever it may be, the deer, you know, and the ducks and the geese are so abundant in the area. And then when the tide goes out, you go down to some beaches for the shellfish harvest, the clams, the cockles, and the mussels that are within the area. The gooey duck is always a delicacy of our people. The sea urchins, the sea cucumber. Our people have always moved with 4 seasons of the year when they do their harvest within like Rupert Harbor and Metlakatla Pass is always our winter village to start with. And the Skinner River were the places, the real issue of the Skinner River way back then were the fur trade. The cost of the furs were really high in them days, and the furs were abundant. And today the cost of furs, the difference today is the furs have declined in cost. And some of the furs that when they're done to how they want them, takes a long time to do, such as the beaver and the otter. And I guess one of the main issues is the imitation nylon furs came into effect and killed the market, but the market of the mink is still abundant, and a lot of our people are going back to trapping the marten and the kosh today. But the food harvest that's done by our people in a lot of the tribal areas still continues, as it were, way back then. Where we harvest our food is still in the same places. But today it's done in a more modern way than the way it was done by canoes some days. And when they travel in canoes, they're prepared to stay for 2 or 3 weeks or a month at a time. Today you can go out with a modern gas boat and stay 1 or 2 days on the weekend and do what you have to do to put food up. And the other thing is that today we have the deep freezers. Back then we didn't have that, and had to rely on the real fresh harvest when those harvests are done to survive on those food. Like I said, Rupert Harbor was not chosen to live in the winter months because it was a nice harbor, but because the abundance of resources to survive on in the winter months was the reason why they chose that. And some of those resources that they harvest, like maybe the Dundas, the Stevens Island, are so close to the area. And those areas like Dundas and Jayus and Melville and Denura Island are still used quite fluently by our people in the spring months in regard to the seafood harvest that we have to do. And today, when our people do it, they take their children along to teach the new generation where these harvests take place and how it's done. So the trend continues in the new generation to what it's going to be, that they know where this harvest take place. They're taught by their parents and how the harvest is done. But today, it's a lot easier with the deep freezers they're put up for the winter than way back at the beginning of time when those were not in place at all. And you'd have to rely on the real fresh seafood harvest. And our people know exactly when those harvests are okay to be harvested. You hear so much from the Department of Fisheries today about the red tide issue, and those are when some of the seafood are spawning, and they don't touch them during that time of spawning when that is around. There was always notice by our people when not to harvest and when to harvest. And it's always noticed by our people called the ayaw and how these harvests are done so that you don't over-harvest. And there's always, if you're going to harvest do any deer hunting, you'd be looking at doing the hunting on the males and not the females. The females bring back the new crop. So is the mountain goat, the moose, and those kind of species. They know when that's going to be done. And, and they don't, in the spring, they don't touch them because the meat isn't as tender as it is in the fall. There's always ways of our people when they move with the 4 seasons of the year. And how they found this place, Kw'Alaams, was when they move into the Nass River, they always stopped off here. The 9 tribes always stopped in their own camp places. The 9 tribes, each of the tribes had their own longhouses that they always came back to before they really decided to live here from the Malakala Pass and the Cane Island area. And the Nass River was always the first harvest that was done in the Wilkins in the early spring. From there, it's the roe and kelp when the herring starts to come around. And the place that is left for us there now is the place called Kw'Alaams in the north end of Portia, where the harvest is done, and the only place left that haven't been overrun by the commercial sector, and our people have to go that distance today to harvest the roe and kelp. Well, like I said, the harvest is done with the 4 seasons of the year, and you know, after the roe and kelp, it's the seaweed, and the harvest of all the other sea resources in the camps that they have, like in the Dundas, the Jayas, the Melville Island, the Newer Islands, Stevens. And when these are done, like in the this time of the year in May and June, the seaweed harvest is just about done now, and the halibut, the lingcod, the red snapper that they take with it and put up for the winter. You know, these are just not harvest, what do you call, it's a harvest that was designed so that the survival of our people, why we're still here today. You know, these are the resources, why they chose these places. The different tribes chose these places as their harvesting areas at different times of the year, is to survive on. When the salmon arrives is the biggest issue, and the weirs are put up in the mouth of the river years ago. Today it's different, the modern way is with the gill nets. But the weirs were the issue of the salmon years ago. And to get the halibut, they designed a halibut hook called the new. And you only catch the big halibut and you don't catch the little ones. But when the white man redesigned that to the small hooks, they get the little ones. And killed off the new crop that's supposed to be for conservation. Mm-hmm. Our way of harvest was always been conservation. Not to over-harvest and make sure you leave enough for the next stock to come when they do come back. And the salmon years ago was so abundant. You know, the cannery started been all over in the mouth of the Skeena, the mouth of the Nass. We used to call them the gold mines. Today, there's none. There's no more. And the decline of that is starting to show already. You know, the mismanagement of the DFO is one of the big issues of concern of our people. And you know, that you don't interfere with any of these spawning areas in the salmon when the salmon go back to spawn. And they've always, that when they use the weirs, they only take what they need and let the rest go by to spawn so that they'll come back again the following year. But today, you know, the interference of the DFO of how that spawn takes place is when you don't interfere with nature. You know, and the abundance way back in that time. You know, you could, I remember one year in the mouth of the Skeena River, when you actually see that salmon roll over the bar as the tide comes in the Skeena. the abundance of salmon, and the abundance just rolls, just like it rolls over the bar. There were so many. Today you don't see that. So after the salmon season, when that's done, and then the trapping comes into play until the snow falls. You know, and that's where, they say there was a trail always from the place just behind Cane Island into the Skeena River, where they leave the canoes in the Skeena that they use there, and walk back to Rupert for the winter months and live there for the winter until the spring break. And Cane Island was always the, I guess the first thing is from Kw'Alaams, when they migrated down the Skeena River, each of the tribes selected their own sites in each of the rivers that pertain to them, the 9 tribes, such as the Lakels, the Kw'Alaams, the X2 River, you know, and the places like the Zimmecord, the Copper River, and right down to the mouth of the Skeena, and it ends up into the Xtal, which is the Kw'Alaams tribal territory. And all the rivers that flowed into the Skeena were retained by the tribes for the trapping areas. Some of them are still the tribal trapping grounds, like one of them is the Kw'Alaams that I mentioned, the Xtal River. It's a tribal area, a trapping area. And the Ginadoix is a strong one, as well as the Gilozau and the Lakels, the X2 and Kw'Alaams. You know, and following the trapping season, they camp in different areas in Rupert Harbor and Malakala Pass before it was called Malakala. Malakala was the real name of the area. And Spoornum Kalazap was the name given to the place called Malakala now. At the time, and it was a village of the Gidwal tribe that I belonged to, that lived in that area, and had a longhouse there. And before the arrival of Mr. Duncan into that area, and the missionaries start coming into play, and the issue of the tribes. Mr. Duncan had a lot to do with the issue of taking away the culture of our people, and namely the artifacts, the totem poles. If you're going to become a Christian, you can't have these. You've got to give them up to him. You know, and the group that moved to Malakata, Alaska, all had to do this. They relinquished all, even their Indian names, and the artifacts, like the ones that were put up for auction in England there, and the ones pertaining to one of the missionaries that were acquired from Duncan by that missionary. And you know how those were done were just taken from our people, and that because they were Christians, they can't no longer have these. And in one of my speeches, I said that it's not written in the Bible that that's going to be the issue if you become a Christian. There's nothing stating that I have to give up all my artifacts to that minister because I'm under the Christianity now. And that's how a lot of our artifacts ended up in the museums and where they're at now. You know, the actually, I guess you might call it just how they did the, there was a person coming around, and a lot of our people hid those away from the missionaries because they were afraid of losing them. And a lot were kept. And they're still around today in some of the homes within this community. And when the movement of our people after Metlakatla, like this was always a stop-off area for the first, when they moved into the Nass for the Olickan harvest. They've always stopped off here. And when the Hudson Bay Company, when Legare gave authority for the Hudson Bay Company in one of his properties here, which is just down where the school is. And he gave authority because his daughter married one of the fur traders at the time. And to use that property, and when they're sued, it reverts back to this community, namely that tribe. And today, that is the issue now. We have that property all back, and including down to the, that was listed as the Hudson Bay property. Now we have that all back to this community here. And that is why the school is built on the area, and part of it is where this, you know, and that's the reason why they, but when they moved, and it was the tribes, the 9 tribes had their own sites in their longhouses where they lived on the island and on the mainland to start with. It wasn't how it is today. But lately it had been redesigned, and the village was always designed accordingly with how these roads, there used to be the trails between. They're always designed nicely in blocks by our people. And the causeway that's there now used to be a bridge, and our people built the bridge themselves to connect us to the Rose Island, called Rose Island. And the reason why it's called Rose Island is, again, the abundance of roses in the area in those days. And the fur trade was when they started living here, and the 9 tribes started living here continuously, and kind of abandoned the issue of Rupert Harbor, but still go back to the harvesting area that's done within those areas where the harvesting takes place. They always go back to those areas in the winter months to do those harvests. So no matter where we go within the areas that pertain to us with our tribes, those harvesting sites have always remained the same. Only today we do it in a more modern way, and we can go out there and stay on the weekend like in a good spring weather like we're having now. We'd stay like the weekend is 3 days, and they'd spend the 3 days in those areas to do what they have to do. But way back them days, they stayed for a month at a time, and weeks at a time in order to do that harvest. And they traveled by canoes. And it's wonderful how far they used to go by those canoes. You know, they travel down to the States. I always heard it. The stories around the campfires, and how far they had to go to pick hops, how far they have to go to get the Olicans, and travel by canoes to do it. Like you say, today you have the modern way of traveling. You can get there in one day in the Nass River where we do that harvest. Today we can drive there right to, you know, the road is right into the area now. But them days it was canoes. Everything was done by canoes. The importance of our culture to continue and taught in our school is so important. The history of our people and survival, namely the gathering of our own food and the areas where it's done. Those are the really important issues that has to be and continues to be passed on from generation to generation. And you know, as you see how well the children pick that up, namely the culture. When I come to work in the morning, I hear the drum beating in the school gym, doing their own morning issue of our culture, and then the dances and the songs that they sing first thing in the morning before I started school. You know, and not only that, I believe it's a proud moment for our people that our new school band that's also there now. You know, and years ago, the first band that was here was called the Nelson Cornet Band. Before there was the Port Simpson Concert Band. And when they performed for the Duke of Connaught in Vancouver, they performed against the Goldstream Guards. And that's how they won the colors of the uniform that when they won that contest. The Queen's colors is what they won. And we're all given a set of uniforms after they won that contest and medals to go with it. That was the first band that was formed here. Now that's coming back strongly with the young students. And I believe they're going to be in the She Fest parade tomorrow. And you know, the excitement is there by our people to see that. The other day they did a parade in the village here to show their new uniforms and what's going to be shown at the parade in Rupert. So, you know, the culture of our people, it's nice to see that our culture is alive and well. You know, the 9 tribes that pertains to this community has not dwindled away from us. And it's going to continue for years to come. That the history of our people has continued to be talked about. And where we originally came from. And why we're here. And how we survived, how our elders survived. Like I said, they chose the winter harbor in Rupert, to live in Rupert area, which we call Prince Rupert today, was the Cane Island area and the Metlakatla Pass, was the abundance of resources within that area to survive on in the winter, because why they chose the place. And as the tribes picked the areas where to go in the different seasons of the year is why we're there, where the harvest is done so that we continue to live. And those are the real important issues to really remember why the different tribes lived here and there, from all the way down the Skeena into the Nass, Dundas, Stevens Island, was when those harvests are done within those areas at a certain time of the year. That's the important part for the new generation. And it's called Kw'Alaams. When it's their time, there'll come a time when one of them will be sitting here telling a different person, you know, where this all came from. And it'll be nice to hear. I've always mentioned that to our elders, that one day we'll see, our children will be the ones speaking instead of us. So it's nice to see, like, you you know, that trip that the students took in regard to the arts and what they do and what they learned in school is a very nice one to be. You know, and I believe the elders are always called to the schools when these happen or before the movement or whatever they're going to do. And the tribal dancers, there's a lot of them involved in our culture in regard to the tribal dancers. And we have a good leader here that teaches them what's going to be. And they catch on very quickly. You know, when you see the young children do those in front of you and how well they do it, they're really exciting. That you know why I always say our culture is alive and well and will continue to go a long way. And even our language is starting to come back strong to what it is. It's starting to be taught in our schools. Before it wasn't. It was only the French language. But now the Tsimshian language is spoken. You know, and then the culture is so important for our new generation. You know, years ago they were so different. In my time as I grew up, and all the years I grew up in this area. Like now, we've got the swimming pool here. You know, you used to see the kids on the beaches and wait till the summer months come along to do that. But today in the winter months, they've got place to go and, you know, at different times of the day. Like, you know, the children got different hours in those pools. And not only the recreation center, but they got a pool right next to it now. And before we opened it, like the repatriation of the art that was done by the late Charles Duddart, are the totem poles that are in that recreation center. One is in the one in the pool was repatriated from the old totem theater that used to be in Newport. That was in front of that pole that was done by the late Charles Duddart. We were successful in repatriating that. And the poles that are in the old Empress Hotel, there were 8 of them pertaining to each of our tribes. There's 9, and the 9th one we couldn't get back because it was taken out by the previous owner of that hotel. But we do have the 8 up in the recreation center. And the importance of repatriating those were the artwork that was done by the late Charles Duddart that did that. And you know, the totem pole that's in front of the band office there was done by the late Charles Duddart. And the one in front of the longhouse there was done by the late William Jeffrey. It pertains to the Gilwell tribe and the 4 crests of that tribe is what's the history that's on there. So, you know, one of these days we're going to see our new generation carving each pole for each of the tribes. And that'll be wonderful to see. You know, the culture is coming back so strong and continues to be. And our way of life is not going to retreat away from us. The harvest that we do in the different seasons of the year is going to continue to be into the new generation to come. When you hear the elders speak and what they want to see continue for the children, for our children and our grandchildren, you know, they're preparing the way our parents prepared us why we're still here today is what we have to pass on to the new generation and continues to be in years to come. And the issues are not going to die. We're going to continue to see a lot of our culture come back to where it was. It's starting, and that trend is going to continue. The quest pertaining to each of the tribes really pertains to the house leaders. You know, you got a chief, and the house leaders are underneath the chief. And the house leaders are the real land owners with the chief of the different areas where they go to. You know, and the name they carry is tied to that area where they do those harvest or trapping area or hunting area that pertains to that tribe. And, you know, and continues to be. And it's passed on to the next generation. When that person passes on, it's prepared who's going to take that name. And it continues. It's not, it doesn't fade. That history is brought back and said, this is the person that's going to take that name when this person passes. It's prepared and continues to be. As the new generation comes, it's called Kw'Alaams in our language. It's passed on from generation to generation. And that's what's really important. That's bringing back our culture so strong. The big names that's carried by each of those tribal members and house leaders. And when those house leaders speak, they speak strongly. The authority that they have when they speak. And that's, you know, the children hear this and take it on strong as they hear what the elders are saying. So there's times that our elders ask us at our meetings that we bring the senior students in to listen to our deliberation. And we do that. You know, in some of the issues that are of great concern, and we invite the students into some of these deliberations. So, you know, there's ways that you try to bring the issues to the children. And the importance of what's done in the school now, the teaching of our language and our culture in the school is what's really the big backbone of the whole issue. You go into the schools now in the morning and like you hear the drum beating when I go to work every morning. That's our culture. That's why I keep saying our culture is alive and well. And it's going to continue to be for years to come. The painting you see behind me here was done by a young artist by the name of Alvin Tate, I believe. And it's a painting of the house front of the Kw'Alaams tribe. And that's where the sign came from. So, you know, and these were the kind of house fronts you used to see in all the areas where the 9 tribes lived in this community when they first came here. Like the crest of the Kw'Alaams were the killer whales. And the copy of it is hanging in our office there. And you know, when you look at the real design, the fine print of the real design and how well it's it really tells the history of that tribe and how many house groups they have within that tribe. Is what that painting really consists of. It's not just to make the place look nice. It tells the history of the tribe, how many houses they have. And that, you know, each of those, and every one of those longhouses have those views. You know, the totem pole also tells the history of the tribe. So it's not just a decoration. You know, those were the way of telling the tribal history when that painting is done. It resembles where you come from. who you are. And I've seen some of the copies of the late Charles Stuart's copy of the Prince. Each one of them has a history of the story of what the design is, and where it comes from, and which tribe and which house owns it. You know, and then when you see a totem pole, you know pretty well that that's the history of a certain tribe and which tribe owns it. You know, and but when the missionaries tried to destroy all that, and now some of them are coming back to the different areas where they took. You know, how far the artifacts traveled that pertain to where it was taken to our tribes, where it was taken from Malakala in the year 1800. It was almost 2 centuries before we seen them back again. And we were fortunate that the buyers were from Victoria. And we were involved in the, we asked if at first they could be sewn in Prince Rupert Museum so that our children would be able to see them and our elders would be able to see them. And we were very fortunate that they agreed with us. And even went further and invited us to the opening of the sewing of those artifacts in Victoria. And we took part in that as well. The treasures of the Tsimshian. Naturix, Amwal Tsimshian is what it really is in our language. It's so important. Not only those, but all of the artifacts pertaining to the 9 tribes are treasures of the allied tribes of not only Kw'Alaams but Malakala. Malakala belongs to the 9 tribes. So they share the same territories as we do. Because one of the issues, you know, why Malakala lived there and we lived here was the government issue again and the missionaries. Why Malakala, Alaska is there was what the missionaries did when they tried to take away our culture and weren't successful in doing it. Instead, our culture was even stronger than it was. Our people always reminded us that we cannot lose our culture. It's our way of life. You know, like I explained how the harvest is done in different areas that pertains to each of the tribes. And that's what's really important. Why we're still here today was an account of the resources that's tied to the land and the sea that we're tied to. Why we're still here today.